This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is David Schemm, Kansas Farm Service Agency State Executive Director, as we learn more about him as he begins in this role for the second time. He mentions what his goals are for the agency. K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan continues the show as she explains what concerns she has for crops from the recent weather. Tina discusses wheat, corn, and soybeans. The Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Brian Lubbers concludes the show as they converse about a listener question asking about herpes in cattle. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking with the Kansas Farm Service Agency. And today we're joined by State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
David, not the first time you've been on Agriculture Today, but it has been a few years, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So, I had the opportunity to serve as the State Executive Director underneath the first Trump administration, and was able to come over here and join your predecessor, Mr. Atkinson, and that was a lot of fun being able to engage and talk about FSA during that time frame there. So, with the end of that first Trump administration, I kind of went back a little bit to the farm, but also had the opportunity to work with our U.S. Senator, Dr. Roger Marshall, as an ag advisor here in the state, and spent a couple of years doing that. I kind of wanted to eventually I think, a lot of our listeners can relate to have a returning son to the operation and want to be able to spend more time with him. So had the opportunity and spend a little bit more time with my son and devote a little bit more time to the farm there. So been the last couple of years doing that, although I did have the opportunity to also serve in some leadership roles with some of our ag organizations during that time frame, and most currently here was serving on the United Sorghum Checkoff Program, one of their board members on that there. I had to obviously step away from that role there to step into the State Executive Director position here. So I'm what everybody refers to as a retread, and glad and excited to be back.
And what does home farming look like for you? What does your operation look like in your family?
Absolutely. So we are Sharon Springs, Kansas is where the operation is located. So, many of our producers who are familiar with the state, they know Sharon Springs. It is way out west is where we are. We're primarily a dryland operation, have just a little bit of irrigation there. I do claim cattle as well. I grew up around cattle. We were a seed stock producer, raising Charolais, eventually had some commercial cows. Reached the time in the late about 2009, 2010 to decide to sell out the cattle, kind of dealing with some drought, having to look at purchasing feed, and having a farming row crop operation had grown enough there that we decided to get rid of the cattle there. But I always enjoyed the cattle as well there. So just a family farm. I'm the third generation out there. My son, who's returned home to the operation, is the fourth generation. So it's kind of the three of us out there taking care of the operation and doing that.
What are some important skills that you feel like you gained from growing up in agriculture that you find really important to implement into what you're doing now?
I was thinking about this here just the last couple of weeks, Shelby, and it's interesting you bring that up there. I think a lot of our producers out there can truly relate that when we look at our operation, and it's the quintessential that we hear that the farmers are the price takers, not the price givers, So, I think when our producers out there realize one of the key to success to any operation is efficiency. Being able to look at ways that we can still do a good job with what we have, but utilize our resources, watch our costs out there to be able to make sure that we have a good bottom line, and that we do have the opportunity to transition to that next generation when that comes up. And that's I think one of the core skills that, I can bring here and have brought before to FSA is coming in and looking at it and saying, where can we continue to maintain that high level of service to our producers out there, but also including the employees there in that making sure that we can allow their job to be easier and still maintain that high level and even improve that service to our producers there. So I think that whole concept of efficiency and evaluating that's a skill set that I've definitely brought. Obviously from a personal standpoint, I think dealing with a lot of the boards that I have dealing with and learning to work with people is definitely a dynamic, especially when we look at more internally and working with our employees across the state here. We deal with a little bit less than 500 roughly employees across the state that we work with there. And, again, making sure that those employees have tools, everything that they need there, and the support that they can get from a state office and to be able to make sure we service our producers.
What has it been like coming back for the second time?
It's been great. It's been super welcoming by our employees, and then I've heard from producers as well. Welcoming you back, and it's been good to hear that. It's been an opportunity to renew and make new acquaintances and meetings there. I guess one of the things that has been interesting for me is that when I came into this role the first time here, and we've all heard it, it's like drinking from a fire hose, especially when you step into this role initially here. One time I made the comment to somebody when I had done, a lot of lobbying or a lot of interaction from the farm bill and farm programs, a little bit more from the political side when dealing with ag groups. It was like, looking at the outside of a clock and how to best make the clock look and be able to read time and everything like that. When I stepped into my role at FSA, it was something like taking that clock and looking at it from the backside, what the whole mechanism is, so that it can tell the hour and minute time can be at the right time and what all the mechanism is to make work. So as you first step into that role, you're learning so much. For our producers that go into our FSA offices out there, they know the alphabet soup that we deal with all day long, whether it's the FSA or the CRP or ECAP. You want to name the program, we've got our alphabet soup out there. So it's really just learning a tremendous amount. Coming into this second time here, I think very much for me, it's a little bit like riding a bike. You kind of get back into the motion. Obviously, stuff has changed in this interim the last 4 years, but there's still a lot of stuff that I can relate to, and I do have some background, history, and knowledge with it there. So, been really good. The staff has been really great helping me get up to speed, but I also feel like it's been an advantage to me to more quickly get into the role and being able to start to implement what I have for long-term visions, goals for the agencies to service our producers.
What are your goals for the Kansas Farm Service Agency?
It's a lot of things, and sometimes it can be in the details, and sometimes it can be a grander picture. But I think overall, it's for us to become even better servicing our producers. And that in itself, when I say that, can entail a lot of challenges because, as I have even mentioned earlier on, our producers range not just in geographically location, which each has its unique challenges and dynamics going there, but we also have a wide range of producers when I look at ages. I mean, again, when you get into that generational change on an operation, I know we have many producers out there who are, towards the, how would I say, twilight of the career, 60s, 70s, even 80s out there. And it is important for them to be able to come into those county offices and get that in-person service. I've also found it very interesting from my perspective firsthand, and as I brought my generation back, my oldest boy here, that he is that younger generation, and he wants more interaction by phone and technology and stuff like that. So again, my goal is to being able to make sure we can service all of our producers out there and just do a better job at it overall. Again, it's about servicing our producers.
And as we're thinking of taking care of our producers, what are some upcoming deadlines, programs currently taking place at the Farm Service Agency?
Well, many of our producers, I think, are in the process of signing up for ECAP or have gotten signed up for it. That deadline is August 15th on that. Of course, coming up here a much shorter window is our general CRP deadline, which is June 6th there. And for some of our producers who are signing up for the continuous CRP, that deadline here is at the end of July 31st there. So, definitely if you're in those roles there, get into our county offices. We also have our crop reporting certification there, July 15th, with that day coming up there. So, some neat things going on there. I've got to note that our CRP, this is the 40th anniversary of what is considered by many one of the most successful and impactful conservation programs that have been out there, especially when you talk about number of acres that it impacts specifically even to our state.
As we round out today's conversation then, David, what would you like to share with Kansas farmers and ranchers?
We are here to service you, and it is our goal to do the absolute best job we can, and our offices are very much focused upon that. I once years ago here took a little bit of a different approach to many people have heard Paul Harvey's famous poem, "So God Made a Farmer," and I did a slight twist on it and said, "So God made a county office worker." But one thing that always struck to me that I have universally held out there is our county office employees out there truly feel like, and the comment I hear constantly, Shelby, is these are my farmers when they talk about the farmers in their county offices. And so I always love that our county office people truly take a personal interest in those producers and servicing them. So I want producers out there to know that we are truly here to service them, and our employees out here are very much dedicated to helping them and doing the best we can.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about weather concerns that we're seeing in crop fields with K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. Tina, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Tina, first wanting to make a quick mention of wheat, and what did you see in wheat as you've gone around the state specifically for those wheat plot tours?
So I've been to a number of wheat plot tours going down to Reno and Reno County, down to McPherson County, and then all the way over to Parsons, down in the deep southeast. We kind of seen some isolated areas of some kind of wind damage, not just of wheat that's been blown over by what we would think of straight line winds, but more of it kind of being swirled and laid very messily. Can we think of those spots being a complete yield loss? It really depends if that wheat was actually snapped. Again, I wasn't in there really trying to dig up and see what it looked like, but we may still have some time in the season. If we get some, warmer days, it may try to pick back up. But in some of those spots, we may be a little too late in the season where it may just stay down, still develop the kernels, and just kind of being more of a thrushability nightmare when it comes to harvesting those portions of the field. Again, not widespread, not acres on acres on acres, but lots of just very spotty, like, oh, that's that whole side of the field is laying down. And then fields adjacent to it, we saw corn about the V2, V3 stage, so still very young corn that was also wind blown over.
What other weather concerns are you seeing when you look at corn?
So we stated this in a e-update earlier into May when the last group of rain showers came through of, saturated soils and, standing water can be a concern to corn. A lot of times it can recover. We're still pretty early in the season. We may see some yield dings later on. We may see a disease situation flare up that's more of a waterborne or soil-borne situation. Kind of take each situation as it occurs. If we see some really stark yellowing of corn and dying back, then depending on when that happens, we may do a pre-plant, probably not. Kind of just depends on how widespread that damage is. And another kind of key point to think about when it comes to corn, the growing point for the corn plant is still below ground up until the V5 stage. So it still has some protection below ground. So these cooler days with the rain, it should pull back out. So say I was talking about that wind damage. If we were above V5 in some fields and we snapped it, we can think of it as like green snap, the corn might not come back from that because that growing point has officially broke.
So is it okay for corn to be submerged in a little bit of water for a while?
So for tolerance in young corn for that full submersion, so the whole plant is under some kind of water, maybe it's a low spot in your field, maybe it's next to, a river bottom and it floods pretty traditionally, young plants can really only tolerate a few days of full submersion. Symptoms and stand problems are going to be seen late in the season though, which is going to trace back to that flooding period. So I was mentioning that V5, V6 for that growing point when it's at or below the soil surface. The plant can really only handle 2 to 4 days of full submerged water. We've had these kind of situations of where it floods a bit, we'll have those low spots in the field, and it warms back up, it stops raining, maybe hopefully dries up, but then we're getting wet spots again. Does that mean we've kind of elongated our period of time of how long those plants can handle it? It's very dependent, right? How warm does it get after it was submerged? What kind of soil type is it? There's a lot of factors going into this of, could we see limitations later on? Potentially. Can we really denote that right now? Kind of just depends.
Should growers go out and check those maybe low spots in their fields?
It does not hurt to see how widespread the damage could be. Again, fields may have a low spot, and just kind of depending on, did that corn even come up? When that rain to planting window was, did the corn even come up? Has the corn came up? Is it kind of yellowy? Is it look sickly? Just see how big those areas are.
And while we're thinking about different crops, also wanting to mention soybeans. And are there some weather concerns with soybeans as well?
Soybeans, much like corn, they can handle being underwater for a select amount of time. But then the longer they sit submerged, especially submerged in cooler weather, can be kind of a compounding situation. For how long can soybeans stay underwater? If they're submerged less than 48 hours, so 2 days, they'll be good. If they're underwater for longer than that, with also cool temperatures, we can see more damage. And that's kind of going back to plants still need to breathe, especially their root system. The more it's submerged, the less the roots can actually take up oxygen.
What are we considering cooler temperatures?
Anything less than 80 degrees, but I would still say we're kind of hitting those really, like today, the last couple days, kind of been in the 50s and 60s. This is more of a situation of it's not that the temperatures are too cool for the plant, but we're actually introducing more issues with soil-borne diseases because they like the cool, wet conditions.
What are those soil-borne diseases that we're really wanting to pay attention to?
The one that mainly comes to mind would be Phytophthora fruit rot, as mentioned in our latest e-update for soybeans in saturated soil conditions. If you think you have a soybean seedling disease or an issue, always feel free to reach out to, your local K-State extension office or get in touch with plant pathology in the diagnostics lab.
What's the best way for growers to check for damage in their soybean fields?
So, to determine whether or not the soybeans are damaged, kind of wait until after the water recedes because you don't want to be trolley-lopping through there and making even a bigger mess. If the soybeans were already up, you need to split the stem at the tip and look at the growing point. The healthy growing points will be firm, white or cream colored. A soft dark spot indicates injury within that plant. So that's kind of one of our steps of checking what's going on to soybeans. Also kind of thinking about inoculation in soybeans, especially in saturated conditions. If we're saturated for a good amount of time, so over 2 days, maybe we're going into a week and we still got standing water or just really saturated soils, and our level of saturation is going to be dependent on our soil type. If we've got more of a coarse soil type, kind of think of our sands, water does move through those faster. That's why we typically need more water on those more often. In our tighter or more fine soils going towards those clays, they hold on to water much tighter, so it can actually stay saturated for longer, introducing more issues. So say we've kind of gone into a field, we've been planted, it's emerged, but now we have some chronically yellow beans. It could relate back to the nodulation not working. So kind of some factors that affect our inoculation include poor or inadequate coverage of those seeds at planting, contamination of the inoculant. So kind of thinking back, did we have good inoculant on those seeds? But then if we've kind of had this cold, wettish, or very wet situation, the inoculum never really gets very well into the roots of the soybean, thus never actually start growing those colonies. Without the rhizobia, which is what the inoculant is giving, the soybean can't then have its symbiotic relationship to make nitrogen, reason why now the plant is showing a nitrogen deficiency of yellow plants.
Tina, we've talked more of some negatives of the weather we've recently had, but do you see some positives with the recent weather we've had for our crops?
Some positives with the wet conditions we've had, especially this wet, cooler conditions. Some of our storms, if we look at the K-State Mesonet, they've dropped a good amount of rain in some spots of the state and spots that really have needed that rain, right? So when we get these high rain events, we can also get some runoff. Runoff sometimes a bad thing, sometimes it's a good thing when those ponds, for a lot of our livestock producers, have been kind of falling drier. And kind of this cool, more steady rains we've been getting, the wheat really likes it. So in the wheat quality tour, they went around, a lot of the researchers went around the state and they were saying, 40, 45 bushels per acre for the wheat, but that was not considering at that time if we were going to get a rain or not. Throughout the state, we've seen a good amount of rain. Is that going to really make the wheat yield? We'll see. It kind of just depends. But also we've kind of fallen into this. We went into a drier period. We're getting rain. We can't complain too much when we get rain, except it delays planting for some of our late beans and maybe some of our late corn. But beggars can't be choosers.
Tina, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. There are 2 Agronomy E-Update articles on this subject, which I will link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Or if you'd like to find them for yourself, you can do so by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Also, if you'd like to check out K-State's Mesonet website, I will also link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can find it for yourself by going to Mesonet.k-state.edu. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with the Beef Cattle Institute answering a listener question. Today, we're joined by Brad White, Bob Larson, and Brian Lubbers.
So, a producer that had a cow that showed signs of a urinary tract infection was treated, later had some bumps on her vulva, and the veterinarian was thinking that this might be infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, IBR. Wanted to get you guys' thoughts, and a couple specific questions that she had is this going to affect the rest of the cows, am I heard? And is it okay to sell this cow? So maybe Bob and Brian, you want to give us a little backgrounder on herpes, and IBR is a herpes virus.
Yeah, it is a herpes virus. And in cattle, it is really common. As far as we know, it's pretty contagious. It spreads through herds really rapidly. I think our vaccines for IBR, herpes virus, are pretty effective. And so a lot of cattle have decent immunity to herpes virus, either from natural exposure or vaccines, or probably a little bit of both. And so we honestly don't see what this owner described, which is the actual kind of little vesicles. On the human side, the human herpes virus, we see cold sores. And if you remember what a cold sore is like, that little vesicle on your lips. In cattle, yes, this herpes virus causes vesicles. It's one of the reasons the other term for it in cattle is red nose, where we'll see it as a respiratory disease syndrome. And again, we honestly don't see that classic red nose very often. Every once in a while you do, and that's usually due to those vesicles really being pretty severe on the nose area, and you'll get some real red inflamed areas. The other place you'll see it is on the reproductive tract, either if it's a bull, along the penis and prepuce, and if it's a female, along the vulva, you get these little vesicles. So it's pretty common. Honestly, because it's so common, we don't see the manifestations of the true vesicles very often. But when we do, I'm a little bit concerned about it's also an abortion-causing disease. So in this herd, we have a history of herpes virus causing clinical disease during pregnancy, and we can see some abortions in that group of cows a few weeks after this outbreak of the vesicles or the little bumps on the vulvas. So, I mean, at this point, there's probably nothing you can do. I mean, coming in and vaccinating at this point isn't going to change the outcome at all. But I am concerned, and I'd watch those cattle real closely because we could have a few of them abort. Other things to do is, recheck your vaccine protocol. Make sure that you're, using the vaccines appropriately. And it is a antigen that I think works pretty well. And so it's one we want to focus on.
So, Brian, I was going to ask you as kind of a follow-up to what Bob said. So he talked about the vaccine may not work well in the herd at this point, but is that going to go – is the herpes going to kind of pass through and then we won't see any further problems, or is it going to stay within this herd as she talked about moving to the next area?
Yeah, so one thing that I'd kind of add to what Bob said is, so we think that once you have a herpes infection – or your cattle have a herpes infection, that virus actually goes dormant and it basically lives in the nerve roots. And so that's why Bob mentioned cold sores. Once you get a cold sore, you get stressed out, you're going to get another cold sore because it's called recrudescence. So the virus becomes active again. So, and my guess is, and this listener mentioned that they have a closed herd. There was a bull that was purchased. So it would be pretty easy to bring a non-symptomatic herpes carrier into the herd. So I suspect that probably has happened somewhere along the way.
Is it okay to sell this cow while she's clinical?
We've talked about herpes a lot, but there are some other things that I would want to make sure. I suspect that's probably what this is, but the listener also mentioned trick, and without seeing the animal, so trick will cause kind of a thick white discharge from the reproductive tract, which hasn't been described here, but it could complicate it. So I'd want to make sure that that's what we have, although I'm pretty confident from the history. But as far as the herpes go, most animals are going to have either been exposed or be carriers. So selling this animal, there are lots of herpes carriers that are getting sold.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.